He broke up with me over a text and took all our money, but life hit him harder than he expected. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I still remember waking up that morning, thinking it was just another ordinary day. The sunlight streamed through the window, and everything seemed normal. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. My heart skipped a beat as I unlocked it, but the words froze me in place. It's over. I took the money. I couldn't breathe. My stomach dropped, and my hands started shaking. All those months of saving, planning, dreaming, it was gone in a single moment. Ethan had always seemed so perfect. Charming, thoughtful, the kind of man you think you could trust with your life. I thought we were building a future together. Our home, our plans, our little savings, they were supposed to be ours, a foundation for the life we imagined. And now it was gone, vanished along with him. I stared at the message for what felt like hours, unwilling to believe it. How could someone I loved, someone I trusted, do this to me? The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. The man I thought I knew, the one I had laughed with, cried with, and shared my dreams with, had vanished overnight, leaving only heartbreak and anger behind. I felt numb at first, like the world had stopped spinning. My mind kept replaying every conversation, every smile, every plan we had made. Was it all a lie? Had he ever really cared? The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. He didn't just break up with me. He destroyed the life we were building together. Tears came, but they were mixed with fury. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt. But I knew I had to be smarter than that. Panicking wouldn't bring back what he had taken, and lashing out wouldn't fix anything. I had to think, to plan, to find a way to reclaim what was mine. The first steps were small and shaky. I called the bank, checked accounts, tried to trace anything I could. Every failed attempt made my anger grow, but it also fueled a determination I hadn't realized I had. I refused to let him win. I refused to let him walk away with everything I had worked for. That morning, something inside me changed. The hurt was sharp, but it awakened a strength I didn't know existed. I wasn't just a victim. I was someone who would fight back. I would get my life back, piece by piece, and I would make sure he faced the consequences of what he had done. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, and proving to myself that I was stronger than his betrayal. That day marked the beginning of a journey I never expected, one filled with challenges, heartbreak, and, eventually, the kind of satisfaction that comes from rising above someone who thought they could destroy you. After that terrible morning, life felt heavy and unfair. I couldn't focus on anything without my mind wandering back to Ethan and the betrayal. Every corner of our apartment reminded me of what we had planned together, now stolen along with all the money we had saved. I questioned everything, my trust, my judgment, even myself. How had I not seen the warning signs? How could someone I loved so much turn into a stranger overnight? I leaned on my best friend, Rachel Morgan, more than ever. She was the one person who didn't judge me, who listened without trying to fix everything, and who reminded me that I wasn't alone. "Mia," she said one afternoon, "you didn't fail. He failed you. That's on him, not you." Her words were simple, but they gave me small moments of comfort. Rachel helped me eat when I couldn't, pushed me to get out of bed, and forced me to keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. Legally, I tried to get back what Ethan had taken. I filed papers, spoke to lawyers, and went through banking records, but it was like chasing smoke. He had hidden everything so well, leaving no trace of the money. Each failed attempt made my chest tighten, frustration mixing with my heartbreak. I realized that if I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on luck or chance. I had to think carefully, plan wisely, and prepare myself for the long haul. Sometimes the sadness hit me in waves. I remembered the happy moments with Ethan, the way he laughed at my silly jokes, the nights we spent cooking together, the plans we made for our future home. Each memory felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Those moments had felt so real, so full of love, and yet they had been built on lies. The contrast between then and now made my anger and sorrow even sharper. I wrestled with conflicting feelings every day. Part of me burned with the desire for revenge, imagining how it would feel to make him face the consequences of what he had done. Another part of me longed to escape the pain, to rebuild my life from scratch, and to prove to myself that I could move forward without him. It was exhausting, carrying both of those desires in my heart, but I knew I had to find balance. Rachel reminded me that strength wasn't about lashing out. It was about reclaiming yourself piece by piece. So I focused on the things I could control: my work, my finances, my emotions. I started keeping a journal, writing down every plan and idea, and slowly, I felt a spark of determination returning. I would survive this. I would rise above the betrayal. And eventually, I would make sure Ethan's actions didn't define the rest of my life. The aftermath was brutal, but it was also the moment I realized something important. I had the power to take back my life, even if it meant standing alone for a while. The pain of betrayal had opened the door to strength I didn't know I had, and I was ready to step through it. I needed a way to keep myself afloat, so I picked up a part-time job at a small financial consulting firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since Ethan disappeared with our savings. Every paycheck, no matter how small, felt like a victory. Slowly, I began to rebuild a foundation for myself, piece by piece. It was at this job that I met Daniel Reed, a calm and intelligent man in his 40s who noticed I was struggling but determined. He became more than a colleague, he became a mentor. Daniel taught me how to manage money wisely, how to invest cautiously, and how to create plans that could withstand unexpected challenges. I soaked up every bit of advice, knowing that if I played my cards right, I could not only recover but grow stronger than before. At the same time, I started quietly gathering evidence against Ethan. I went through our past banking records, contracts, and even found witnesses who had seen him make questionable moves with our money. I kept meticulous notes, organized every document, and thought through every step carefully. I wasn't going to rush into anything or let my emotions cloud my judgment. This wasn't about revenge in the moment. It was about strategy and making sure justice would catch up to him. I spent hours planning, imagining scenarios, and anticipating how he might try to cover his tracks. Every time I thought about what he had done, I felt a surge of anger, but it was controlled now. I was no longer the naive person who trusted him blindly. I had become careful, observant, and ready. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about him, about how he probably assumed I was broken and powerless. I smiled at the thought because he had no idea how wrong he was. He thinks I'm broken. He thinks I'm powerless. He's wrong. That thought became my silent mantra, pushing me forward whenever frustration or doubt crept in. Even small victories, like learning a new budgeting technique or successfully organizing a file of evidence, gave me confidence. I realized that progress didn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Quietly, steadily, I was taking back control of my life. Every step I took, every lesson I learned, made me stronger, more prepared, and more determined to see this through. By the end of that first month, I could feel the shift in myself. I wasn't just surviving, I was planning, learning, and growing. The anger and betrayal still lingered, but they had become fuel instead of chains. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal, I felt like I had power again, not over him, but over my own life. And that power, I realized, was far more dangerous than anything he could ever throw my way. Ethan had always loved showing off, and after taking all our money, he went all out. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he was living in a luxury apartment, driving expensive cars, and throwing parties that cost more than I made in a month. For a moment, I felt a pang of jealousy, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet resolve. I knew appearances could be deceiving. It didn't take long for cracks to show. Ethan had always been reckless with money, and now that he had full control, his poor decisions caught up with him. Business deals he bragged about started collapsing. Suppliers refused to work with him after he failed to pay bills. Friends who once admired his charm began avoiding him when they realized he was unreliable. I didn't need to investigate. Rumors reached me, whispered in passing by people who didn't even know I was listening. Meanwhile, I continued my steady routine. Every day at work, I gained new skills and confidence. My small wins added up. My finances were stabilizing. My evidence against Ethan was growing, and my sense of control was returning. I felt the difference in our lives like a weight on my chest. He was spiraling out of control, while I was building something real, something solid. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one evening, looking over my notes and hearing about Ethan's latest failure through a friend. A part of me felt satisfaction, not the kind that comes from gloating, but the kind that comes from knowing justice has a way of catching up. He had thought he could get away with everything, and now the universe was slowly showing him otherwise. Even as I felt that satisfaction, I kept my plans quiet. I didn't want him to know I was watching, that I was preparing. Revenge wasn't about instant gratification. It was about patience, strategy, and timing. I had learned that the longer I waited, the stronger my position would become. Every misstep he made unknowingly helped me in the long run. The contrast between us was impossible to ignore. He had everything he thought he wanted: money, luxury, freedom. But he was losing grip of it all because of his own recklessness. I had little, but I had clarity, focus, and determination. The imbalance was ironic, almost poetic, and it fueled the fire inside me. By the time Ethan realized some deals were failing, I was already several steps ahead, quietly observing, documenting, and planning. The anger that had once clouded my mind had transformed into something sharper, a calm, deliberate drive for justice. I wasn't acting on impulse. I was letting the evidence, his mistakes, and his arrogance set the stage for what was coming. That period of watching and waiting became one of the most empowering times of my life. I felt my strength growing as his weakness became obvious. Every rumor, every failure he experienced, reminded me that revenge didn't have to be loud. It could be patient, silent, and far more satisfying when it finally landed. After weeks of careful research, I finally discovered a small legal loophole that could expose Ethan's fraud. It wasn't a big public victory yet, but it was enough to make a difference if I played it right. I spent days studying the documents, making notes, and planning how I could use this information without tipping him off. I knew I had to be smart. Any mistake could ruin everything. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. There was a business networking event downtown, full of people Ethan liked to show off to. He would never suspect me there, not like this. I decided to go, carefully disguising myself so he wouldn't recognize me. It felt strange walking into the same room where he thrived, knowing I was the one holding the key to unraveling his lies. Ethan was exactly the same as always, confident, loud, and proud. He strutted around the room, boasting about his recent successes, name-dropping people, and laughing like nothing had ever gone wrong. I watched quietly from a distance, taking mental notes on his statements, gestures, and claims. Every boast he made was another lie I could document. Every careless word was a new piece of evidence. I moved through the crowd, pretending to network, while actually observing him like a hawk. I noted how he exaggerated numbers, promised deals that were already failing, and misrepresented investments. All the while, my heart was steady. There was no panic, no rash action, just focus. I could feel the tension building inside me, knowing that the moment he realized I was still a threat would come later, and it would be inevitable. I even spoke with a few of his colleagues under the guise of casual conversation, confirming details that supported what I already suspected. Each new piece of proof added to the growing picture of his deceit. I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and calm. The truth was coming together, and I was in control. For the first time since his betrayal, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was setting the stage for him to face the consequences. The suspense was thrilling. I imagined the moment when Ethan would realize that the woman he thought he had destroyed was still watching, still planning, and still strong. That thought alone made my stomach tighten with a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. By the end of the evening, I had everything I needed: documented lies, confirmations from witnesses, and a clear understanding of how to proceed legally. I left the event quietly, blending into the night, while Ethan continued his charade, unaware that the walls were closing in. Walking home, I felt a sense of power I hadn't known before. He might have thought he had won, but in reality, he had unknowingly given me the tools to take everything back. The first confrontation hadn't been verbal or dramatic, but it had worked. I was ready for the next steps, and he would never see me coming when the truth finally hit. I realized that taking on Ethan alone would be difficult, so I started reaching out to people he had wronged over the years. First, I contacted a former business partner who had lost money because of Ethan's lies. Then I found a contractor he had cheated on a job, and finally, a bank officer who had noticed suspicious transactions but couldn't act alone. Each conversation felt like another piece falling into place, another step toward justice. I shared my evidence carefully, showing them the proof I had collected without revealing too much. Everyone I spoke to had their own experiences of being deceived by him, and together, we began to form a quiet coalition. It wasn't about revenge or confrontation yet. It was about exposing the truth in a way that could not be ignored. They listened, verified details, and added their own knowledge to the growing pile of evidence. With each connection I made, my confidence grew. I felt the weight of fear and helplessness lifting, replaced by a sense of control I hadn't felt since Ethan vanished with our savings. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was someone people were starting to rely on, someone capable of standing up to him in ways he couldn't anticipate. Working with these allies also gave me perspective. I realized that what I was doing wasn't just personal. It was about holding someone accountable for the harm they caused to many people. That thought shifted something inside me. My desire for revenge was still there, but it became secondary to a stronger feeling: justice. I wanted to make sure the truth came out and that he faced real consequences for his actions. We met quietly, exchanged information, and planned steps carefully. Every new piece of evidence strengthened my case and my resolve. I began to see the bigger picture. Not just Ethan's downfall, but the way I could rebuild my life with integrity while making sure he couldn't harm anyone else. It was empowering to see how the people I had reached out to were willing to help. They were cautious, yes, but they also recognized that I had courage and focus. That recognition made me feel strong in a way I hadn't in months. I was no longer reacting blindly. I was planning, coordinating, and moving strategically. By the end of those weeks, I could feel a shift inside me. My anger had transformed into determination, my sadness into focus. I was no longer just a heartbroken woman trying to recover what was lost. I was a force to be reckoned with, quietly assembling the pieces that would bring the truth to light. The coalition wasn't loud or public, but it was powerful. Together, we had what it took to hold Ethan accountable. And more than anything, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that my strength and sense of justice had grown far stronger than any desire to simply hurt him in return. I was ready for the next steps, and I knew I would see this through. Ethan's world started to wobble. Deals he had boasted about were falling apart, suppliers were refusing to work with him, and his supposed allies were pulling away. I could sense the panic even from the small updates I heard indirectly. For the first time, he realized that someone was watching, tracking, and quietly dismantling the empire he thought he had built. I knew it was time to move my plan forward. The evidence I had collected, combined with the coalition I had quietly formed, gave me the leverage I needed. I filed legal actions carefully, making sure everything was solid and undeniable. At the same time, I prepared to expose his fraudulent behavior to the authorities who could hold him accountable. Every step was deliberate, measured, and strategic. Meanwhile, Ethan began to feel the pressure. He called contacts, tried to fix deals, and even attempted to cover up mistakes he had made months ago. I watched from a distance as his confidence faltered. The man who had once made me feel powerless was now scrambling, uncertain, and afraid. It was a quiet satisfaction, but a satisfaction nonetheless. The scales were finally tipping. I stayed calm through all of it, never showing that I was the force behind his unraveling. I didn't need to confront him directly. He was already losing control. Every failed deal, every lost ally, every suspicious phone call he received chipped away at his arrogance. I felt a strange sense of relief and justice, knowing that his recklessness and deceit were finally catching up to him. The emotional payoff wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. I remembered the sleepless nights, the tears, and the fear that had followed Ethan's betrayal. And now, quietly, almost invisibly, the tables had turned. Betrayal, manipulation, and lies were meeting consequences in a way that was unavoidable. I reminded myself to stay patient. The law and the evidence were my weapons, not anger or revenge. I wanted him to face real consequences, not just embarrassment. The more he panicked, the more I knew I was doing things right. It was empowering to realize that I had the upper hand, not because I sought vengeance, but because I had acted wisely and carefully. As the legal notices went through and authorities began investigating his actions, I felt a calm satisfaction. The man who had once left me heartbroken was now on the edge of losing everything he had gained through lies and theft. I wasn't celebrating cruelty. I was witnessing justice, the natural outcome of betrayal meeting consequences. For the first time in months, I felt free from fear and despair. The journey wasn't over, but I was in control. Ethan's panic was proof that his actions had consequences, and that knowledge gave me a deep sense of strength. The balance had shifted, and my patience and determination were paying off exactly as I had hoped. Ethan realized the walls were closing in. In a desperate move, he tried to leave the city, thinking he could escape the consequences of his actions. What he didn't know was that I had prepared everything carefully. Every legal document, every piece of evidence, every witness statement was ready. There was no way for him to slip through the cracks. When he arrived at the airport, law enforcement was already waiting. He was stopped before he could board a flight, confronted with paperwork that detailed his fraud and theft. I wasn't there in person, but I had ensured that the authorities had everything they needed to act. Watching from a distance, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the system was finally holding him accountable. It wasn't just law enforcement. The business partners and associates he had relied on began to distance themselves. No one wanted to be connected to him, and they refused to bail him out. Deals collapsed instantly. The man who had once been so sure of his charm and power was now facing isolation, disbelief, and the harsh reality of his choices. I stayed calm through it all. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no need for revenge fueled by emotion. I remained composed because I knew that strength didn't come from anger. It came from patience, preparation, and intelligence. Seeing Ethan cornered and helpless was proof that I didn't need to act out of emotion. Justice was unfolding exactly as it should. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights of uncertainty and struggle. It all had built me into someone capable of facing this situation with clarity and control. My emotions were steady. My focus was sharp. I didn't need to humiliate him. The consequences were enough. From a distance, I observed as officers explained the charges, and business associates refused to intervene. His attempts to argue, to charm, or to manipulate were useless. Every lie, every deception he had relied on, fell apart in front of him. It was almost poetic in its simplicity. He had created this mess himself, and now he was paying the price. The emotional intensity was strong, but it didn't come from shouting or confrontation. It came from the quiet satisfaction of seeing fairness restored, from knowing that patience and strategy had won over betrayal and deceit. I had reclaimed control of my life, and the man who had tried to destroy me was finally facing the consequences of his own actions. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace. The fear, anger, and heartbreak that had once consumed me were replaced by strength and calm. Ethan's downfall wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, and it was exacted without losing myself in the process. The payoff was complete, quiet, and infinitely satisfying. After Ethan's downfall, I was able to recover part of the money he had stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to start rebuilding my life and finally pursue a dream I had put on hold for too long. I used the funds to open a small cafe in the city, a place I had always imagined owning. Every detail, from the layout to the menu, was a reflection of me and my determination to create something lasting. At work, I met Lucas Bennett, a kind-hearted colleague who noticed my effort and resilience. He wasn't flashy or overly forward, but he admired the way I had handled everything. Over time, we became friends, sharing conversations about life, goals, and lessons learned. There was a subtle connection growing between us, built on respect and understanding rather than drama or distraction. It was comforting to know that someone could appreciate me for my strength and not just my struggles. Running the cafe was challenging at first. There were long hours, unexpected setbacks, and moments when I questioned if I had made the right choice. But every success, even small ones like a satisfied customer or a well-executed event, reinforced my confidence. I began to see that I could create stability and happiness through my own efforts, without relying on anyone else's promises or empty words. As I worked, I reflected on everything I had been through. I thought about trust, how fragile it could be, and how important it was to protect it. I thought about self-worth, and how easily it could be shaken when someone betrays you. Most of all, I realized the power of perseverance. Heartbreak and betrayal had tested me, but they had also taught me to be strong, patient, and strategic. I had survived, grown, and learned to trust myself again. Sometimes I looked back at the life I had lost with Ethan, the dreams we had shared, and the money he had taken. I allowed myself a quiet moment of satisfaction, knowing that I had reclaimed my life without letting anger or revenge define me. The strength I felt wasn't about hurting him. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above betrayal and create the future I wanted. Life was far from perfect, but it was mine. Each day I poured energy into my cafe, into my plans, and into the relationships that mattered. I had grown from someone broken into someone capable of facing challenges with clarity and confidence. By the time the cafe was thriving and I felt truly settled, I realized that I had transformed. The heartbreak, betrayal, and loss that once weighed me down had become lessons that shaped me into a stronger, wiser, and more empowered person. I had reclaimed my life, my dreams, and my sense of self, and that was the greatest victory of all. Ethan's world had completely fallen apart. The deals he had tried to build were gone, the people he relied on had abandoned him, and the authorities were now fully involved in investigating his actions. He had no one to turn to, no support, and no safety net. Life had not given him the happy ending he had expected when he took everything from me. Instead, he was left with consequences, isolation, and the weight of his own choices. I, on the other hand, was finally able to breathe freely. I looked back on everything that had happened, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the months of planning and quiet preparation, and I realized something important. The best revenge wasn't about hurting Ethan, embarrassing him, or making him suffer in dramatic ways. The best revenge was reclaiming my life, rebuilding my dreams, and proving to myself that I was stronger than anyone who tried to tear me down. The morning I opened the doors to my cafe, for the first time felt like the start of a completely new chapter. The smell of fresh coffee, the warm lights, and the carefully arranged tables were a reflection of all the effort I had poured into this space. I stood at the entrance, taking a deep breath, feeling proud, confident, and independent. This was my victory, not because Ethan had lost, but because I had gained everything I had worked for. As customers started to walk in, smiling and greeting me, I realized that this cafe was more than just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, determination, and self-worth. Every choice I had made, every difficult moment I had endured, had led me here. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, building something real with my own hands and my own effort. Sometimes I thought about Ethan and the path he was now forced to follow. I felt no anger, only a quiet sense of justice. The consequences of his actions were already unfolding, and I didn't need to intervene further. Seeing him face reality without me having to lift a finger made me understand that real strength isn't loud or vengeful. It's steady, patient, and focused on building your own life rather than destroying someone else's. Standing in my cafe that morning, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I had survived betrayal, overcome heartbreak, and found a way to rise stronger than ever. I had reclaimed my confidence, my dreams, and my independence. I knew now, with absolute certainty, that the best revenge isn't to hurt someone. It's to rise stronger than they ever imagined. And in that moment, as I welcomed the first customers of the day, I felt the truth of that lesson in every fiber of my being. I had won in the only way that truly mattered, by living my life fully, boldly, and without regrets.